welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition is Bubble Bobble Part 2, brought to us by Taito. Released in 1993, pretty late in the NES lifespan, Bubble Bobble 2 was actually an exclusive to Blockbuster and other rental stores, and thus making the game nowadays very hard to come by an actual copy of. The game is a sequel to the original Bubble Bobble, but it does have differences in its story depending upon if you're playing the North American or the Japanese release of the game. The Japanese version of the game actually has you playing as the descendants of the original characters from the first Bubble Bobble, known as Cubby and Rubby, taking place 100 years after the events of the actual Bubble Bobble 2, known as Rainbow Islands. In the North American version of the game, though, you're playing as the classic characters of Bub and Bob, trying to save Bub's girlfriend, Judy, from the evil Skull Brothers that kidnaps her at the beginning of the game. Unlike the original Bubble Bobble, this one is not two-player simultaneous co-op. Instead, the two-player mode is an alternating mode where you play as one character and then switch off to the other. Not nearly as fun as the original game. Another big difference is, unlike the original that had multiple endings for us to go after, there's only one ending to Bubble Bobble Part 2, and it makes the game at least easier to complete because of that. However, what makes it more difficult is the inclusion of a continue system. You actually have a limited number of continues. You can gather more as the game goes, but if you run out, it is game over. Gameplay for Bubble Bobble Part 2 is mostly the same from the original, going around each one of the game's levels, blasting the enemies into bubbles, and then popping them in order to get rid of them. There is the introduction of plenty of new enemies, many of which will take multiple bubbles in order to defeat, some of which you don't even need to bubble up in order to get rid of, such as these fire enemies that we'll be dealing with later on in the game. Returning to the title is specialty bubbles that will appear in certain levels, like these ones filled with water that can go through and knock out a lot of enemies quickly. We also have some new ones introduced, such as the tornado one and the snow one, as well as the star bubble that makes a return from Rainbow Island. To make things also a little bit easier, there's actually a health system as well, represented by the hearts at the top of the screen. When you run out of hearts, that's when you end up losing a life as Bub or Bob this time around. You can actually gather plenty of more hearts scattered throughout the game, and because of this, it's actually a little bit easier not to perish in this title as compared to the original Bubble Bobble. Another really cool addition to this title is the fact you can actually charge up your Bubble Blast now. Holding down the Bubble Blast button, you can actually fire out multiple bubbles as well as fill yourself up and float like a balloon, and this can be really helpful for completing some levels in the game, especially later ones. One of the other cool aspects about the game is with the different backgrounds and the like, we get to see different theme style levels all throughout the game, and every 10 levels we get to battle a boss. A lot of the enemies from the original Bubble Bobble make a return, such as the Monster, aka these like flying whale-like enemies, and we'll be seeing quite a few of them. One cool other addition is some enemies will actually kind of have shields on or protective gear, and you have to blast that off of them first in order to then be able to bubble them. The variety in the enemies in particular is one of my favorite aspects about Bubble Bobble Part 2. In this level, we can do a really fun little bit. If you break open the water bubble above the fire guy, you can actually get it to flow downwards onto the different platforms and take out everybody with a single water bubble. A lot of the levels, it's knowing kind of where to stand safely, to hit multiple enemies, get them bubbled up quickly and popped before they end up becoming a nuisance. If you leave them in a bubble too long, of course, they will break out and be quite angry. As well as if you take way too long on a stage, the evil Sawbones will show up and try to take you out just like the original game. The first boss of the game, known as Spring It, is a giant version of the Zenchan enemies we battle a lot in this game and in the original. Gonna attack the top of it, keep blasting it, doing little jumps and running away from it. As you can see, it's very easy to get away from this boss just because of the way it ends up moving, slowly going up the left and your right sides, giving you plenty of opportunity to deliver hits. Once you deliver enough hits though, the robot will reveal itself and we'll be moving on to the next set of levels. The Needler enemies are one of my least favorites to deal with because, of course, them firing up their hats, they can hit you from a good distance and they cause you to kind of inflate, hurting you, so you want to make sure you stay as far away from them as possible. Sometimes you can wait for water to kind of get to you with these and then take out one, and if you're able to take out the one, you should be able to just barely fall in on the opposite side to take out the other Needler to finish up the level. Just like with the original game, there are random objects that will appear at the beginning of some levels, bonus items that you'll be able to grab, some of which are these gates that will end up taking you to a bonus round and will automatically then skip the level once you end up completing the bonus round. There's also the rare items that will allow you to skip multiple levels at a time if you're able to find and grab them. One of the most important of these items also is a pencil that can sometimes show up, and grabbing that will give you an extra continue. For these minigames, you're battling against an AI character named Barcelon. Your goal, of course, is to get more points than them during the course of the matchup. For this one, it's a volleyball-esque one. We have another one with a ball where we have to try to get it inside of a mouth that keeps opening and closing really quickly. It's actually pretty difficult to actually get points in that one. As well as there's one with a bunch of objects scattered around a maze-like area, and you just have to gather more than he does. Depending upon how many points you score and the like, it can take a bit to get through this. As you can see, there's a timer at the bottom of the screen that keeps going the longer the matchup keeps on going. So honestly, if you want to get through it quickly, keep the ball in play for as long as you can. Once we complete the minigame, we're then taken back to the next level that we're going to take on, and that is round 13 here. There's a total of 80 rounds that we'll be completing throughout the game, and I will be beating most of them. I'll just grab a few of the bonus items throughout the course of the game. In this level, you can take out the enemies or use the electrical bubbles that appear in order to try to help you out. For this level, we're going to take out the enemy on the bottom and then jump up either the left or right side to get into the enclosed area where we can battle the other 3 enemies. Pretty simple level, though sometimes it can be a little bit hard to dodge some of them just because of them bouncing around, and you have a relatively large area that Bob ends up taking up on screen. Round 15 is filled with Zen-chan enemies. I'm going to stay on the left side here, waiting for the first couple of the Zen-chan guys to fall down, and then I can go over to the right side and deal with the other set of Zen-chan enemies slowly coming down, then heading to the middle in order to battle that final one. Now here, you can use either your float up ability by holding in the bubble charge, or throw a bubble and bounce off of it. Holding down the jump button just like the original will allow you to bounce off the bubbles. Depending upon how you need to get into an area, using either the jumping off the bubble or floating up will be better, whichever preference really you end up having. For this level, the Flareon enemy in the center, not to be confused with the Pokemon, you can take out using the tornado. Just wait for them to come up through the ground and hit them at the right time in order to send it through, and that'll instantly take out the Flareon. You should also be able to use them to take out the Zen-chan enemy on the top without having to go up there yourself. While this level has a lot of moving parts, it's not that hard. Well, eventually the Zen-chan enemies should all get to the center top part. You can use the water bubble or just get up there and blast them in order to complete this one. Here's a fun little level. You have all the rainbow enemies bouncing around. It's very reminiscent of levels from the original Bubble Bobble. We can grab this item and freeze everyone, or we can use those items, the fire bubbles, in order to get them to land on that bottom platform and take them out that way. As the next level begins, we're going to go up and grab this heart that appeared for us, and then focus on the star bubbles. If you get one pretty early on near the bottom, it should kind of rotate enough to take out all of those enemies in the center without you having to even go in there. Right after that now, it's time for the next boss encounter. For this one, we're going to use the specialty bubbles. We can grab this potion to help us out, and then we need to send these lightning bolts at the boss. Running in front of them, just keep blasting them. You can send them all towards them. Alternately, you could wait against one of the walls and wait for him to make his way towards you, but it doesn't take too many of these lightning bolts in order to defeat this guy and move on to the next stage. Every 20 levels, you'll automatically be taken to one of the bonus games to complete that. This one is another one of the volleyball ones. I'm just going to do my best to try to waste as much of the clock as I can. Unfortunately, these little bonus games, you can't speed them up at all, and other than the one where you're just gathering the items quickly, they're a bit boring. There was something about the late Taito games on the NES. They like to include little mini-games like this in some of their games. They're long, they're not necessarily the most fun, but it was an interesting idea nonetheless, especially for the time period. Once that's finally complete, we're dropped into the next set of levels. As you can see, also with the 20th level complete, the background does change up a fair amount. At the top here, we can grab this pencil that will give us an extra continue, and just wait for the Zenchan enemies to kind of work their way through the platforms and up. And there's sense in really chasing them down, you'll probably just end up taking damage, and they should pop up way before the Sawbones enemy ends up showing up. Watch out for the couple of snagger enemies at the bottom here. Hitting them from a distance with your bubbles is the best strategy to get rid of both of them before we then attempt to go after the Zenchan enemy above us. A nice easy way to kind of get up is either you can float up or use your bouncing bubbles in order to get to the top platform here, and then we can make a jump over to the other side in order to get to that Zenchan guy. This level is a little bit difficult for sure. You have little tight areas for a couple of the enemies. After a little bit though, the lightning bubbles start to show up and they can greatly help you take out any of the enemies in case you don't feel like trying to test the waters by going into those tight spaces. For this level, a giant trash can pops up at the beginning. We're going to start off by taking out the monster enemy first on the right, just to have one less of these guys, and then knock over the can, which will reveal a bunch more monster enemies. You can use the tornadoes that have then since spawned to take out at least most of them, and you may have to sneak into a little bit of the tight spaces in order to take out this one in the center especially. This area of the game, these set of 20 levels, is known as Boom Town. It's just an ordinary town that apparently has been taken over by the evil forces, the evil monsters here. Level number 25, we have the Chucker enemies. These guys do fire out projectiles, throwing rocks at you, so you have to be very careful not to stand too long in front of them or be prepared to jump over them. You can wait a little while for the water bubbles to slowly make their way through to make the level a tad easier, or just take on these guys head on. Here we have a Twizzer enemy spinning in the center part here. I'm going to go to the top and take out all of these enemies first before then going back down and dealing with them. Basically, you have to wait for him to stop spinning, and when he does, then you're able to launch in all your bubbles. Taking out all the other ones first and then focusing on him makes it pretty easy just to deal with this weird enemy. Another strange enemy appears here, the giant tree trunk, and just like before, we're just going to kind of wait after taking out the other enemies. You can use the tornadoes if you like, or just stand on this platform to the left to easily battle this one. And if you're wondering, the tree does have a name. It's known as Kirkabun. Round 25 drops in a couple of chucker enemies into these small back and forth shifting platforms. Take out the other enemy flying around, and then you can just focus easily on the two chucker enemies or use the lightning bolts to take out them easily in the center. Now for this level, you can see all the little chambers, and of course monster enemies are going to get dropped in. We're going to stand here though on the bottom portion and wait for the first couple of enemies to come towards us, taking out them. If you need, you can start to head up towards them, but honestly, for the most part, you can stand pretty much on this one platform, and most of them are going to come your way. When you get down to the last one, he may try to get away from you a bit, but you can kind of track him down once you're down to just that single monster enemy. The round 30 boss is actually a very familiar face to Taito fans. It's Doe from the Arkanoid series, originally appearing also in Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands, as well as a regular enemy in Parasol Stars, but this time we get to battle him as a full-blown boss for this game, so kind of a cool connection with Arkanoid and Bubble Bobble, of course, made by the same teams. Doe breaks apart and reforms, firing out a lot of projectiles at you, sometimes going up and down before then finally coming back to a single platform where we continue blasting. Each of the parts of Doe need to be bubbled up and broken in order to defeat him. Once you have bubbled up and broken each part, you're moving on to the next level. Level number 31 begins. A bunch of Zenchan enemies at the bottom. Take out those before then going into the maze-like area to take out the Scrapper as well as the other Zenchan. Now, for level 32, you can use your float up ability or just bounce off the bubbles here on the left side. They move really quick, so honestly, it's faster to ride the bubble up than float up in this level, just because that extra little second to charge up. But if you miss the first few bubbles like I did, it's about the same time. Either way, get to the center, take out the Scrapper down at the bottom. Pretty easy level, just make sure that that enemy isn't too close to you when you drop on down. Level 33 has one of those trash cans in the middle, so we gotta break that open in order to get the enemies to appear. They're all in the center kind of area. You can wait for them to either come out towards you, just keep avoiding the car moving at the bottom, and kind of bundle up each one of these guys if possible in that center little area. Introduced in this level is another new enemy, the blobby enemies. They move along whichever surface they are, so they'll keep on moving if they still have space to go, or just walk in a circle if they're stuck in an enclosed area. The animations are a little bit jagged on these guys, so they can quickly kind of point out or point out, depending upon how they're moving, so be careful of them to keep at least a little bit of a distance so they don't instantly come into you when moving across a corner. For the next level, we have invader enemies making their appearance. These guys are the very annoying robot-like guys that fire out bolts of electricity or beams straight on down, trying to crash into you. Get them to appear by breaking open that trash can. You can use the tornadoes to take out at least most of them, and just bubble up the few remainders that you don't end up hitting. Make sure that you try to stay near the top of the area if you have the invaders coming down, of course, just because they're going to end up blasting you. For the next level, we have manticore enemies. These guys take a lot of bubbles. They move a little bit differently than some enemies because they're flying and thus can sometimes be a bit difficult to get ahead. You can charge up multiple bubble blasts to take them out or just keep firing regular ones out until eventually they go away. You don't have to bubble them, they'll just fall off screen. Once they're done, then finish up the stage by taking out the invader guy at the top. For the next level, you have a couple more of those blobby enemies. There's 3 that you'll have to deal with, as well as just a couple of floating guys. Not too challenging of a level to deal with. I also love being able to attach myself to these rotating fans and spin around, and you can actually pop bubbles by doing that, so kind of fun, little extra thing. For the next level, you can see multiple moving cars on the platforms. We can use them to jump up to get to the top part. Do so rather quickly if possible, just so you don't have to worry too much about those invaders. There are star bubbles in this one, but you can move pretty quickly to take out the guys before you even have to worry too much about popping those extra bubbles. One of those curcumon trees at the top, we also can get a heart, which will help us out greatly, of course, giving us that 1 extra hit point. Once we take out the few monster enemies, we're then going to focus on the tree. He does fire out projectiles that you have to bubble up as well, but if you keep firing out consistently, they'll bubble up as soon as they end up appearing. The boss for level 40 is Mad Monkey. You can kind of tell why he's known as that. We're able to get the potion and fire out tornado bubbles. We're just going to pop them along the bottom portion, and just a few of them going straight up is enough to take out this boss. A very, very easy boss overall. Just staying at the bottom and firing out those tornadoes is enough to take this one out. Since we've completed another 20 levels, we get another bonus game, another forced bonus game, but this one at least is the one where we gather all the little diamonds. Whoever gets more of them is the winner. You can either wait for the time to slowly drain out, or once you've gathered all of them, it finishes. We're now on to level 41 and the Shining Lake portion of the game. Here we have another one of those bonus doors to take us to a bonus game, and since we just did that maze one, we'll do another maze one right again. So we can do this real quick and complete another little bonus game. Level number 42 has a lot of the chucker enemies that appear in the center portion. They do start to jump upwards, so be careful even if you're hanging on the left or right sides of the screen trying to take them out. They fire out projectiles pretty quickly, and because there's so much going on screen, it can be sometimes hard to see them. There's a little glitching with the graphics, so some of the projectiles become kind of obscured by what else is going on, so you have to be careful during any level with those enemies. Now this is a very annoying level, and the first time we're going to be using the float ability because just get up here a lot easier than trying to just jump up quickly. The water at the bottom portion of the screen will slowly start to rise up every few moments with the tide kind of coming in, so you have to be very careful and to stay in the center area if possible to deal with all the enemies. Level 44 has a bunch of blobby enemies in these very small areas. You can see they kind of move around quickly. The one ends up getting stuck. We can then go to the right side. There's this waterfall opening where we get these star balloons, and we can use all of them to kind of finish up the enemies without having to go into the tight quarters and trying to gather the enemies that way. This next level is one of the most, if not the most annoying level in the entire game, round 45. For this one, you have the very annoying helicopter enemy. Every time the enemies appear to drops, you have to defeat them, and then eventually the helicopter shows back up. My strategy is floating up into the direct center and then blasting my charged up bubbles at the copter. Take out all the other enemies immediately, and then get back up into the air before the copter shows back up, and blast it again using your bubbles. If you hit it with 3 nicely charged up blasts, you should be able to take out the copter, and it needs to be defeated before you can then finish up the rest of the enemies that it ends up dropping and finally move on. This is one of those levels that I got stuck on as a kid for quite a while because I didn't quite master that floating ability. Thankfully, next level, a lot easier to deal with, just some enemies in tight areas. We're going to get to the top quickly and just keep blasting to take out the Manticore enemy. The little hopping guys we can then deal with. Even if you bubble them and don't pop them right away, they just keep floating immediately up, off screen, and then back again, so you can easily kind of hit them. Once you made it into the game quite a bit and you're completing levels without too much problem, you get rewarded with bonus items. Completing all of the enemies on screen will then reward you with a series of items that, unfortunately, you either need to gather or wait for them to disappear before the stage completes. For this stage with all the chuckers, I recommend getting to the top. If you have hearts, you'll probably end up getting hit, so it's worth a little sacrifice just to deal with these guys pretty quickly and easily. For the next level, you have these annoying spikes that will come down if you go underneath of them, so honestly I just recommend staying away from them and use the bubbles from a distance on the rainbow enemies to take them out without too much trouble. At most, if you stay in the center area, just be careful not to jump up on the platforms and run directly into any of the spikes coming down, but not too difficult, just a little bit of a nuisance. Here we have the Haitakun enemies. These guys are basically little soldiers, and you have to knock their hat off first in order to then bubble them. You can also use the snow bubbles, that's what these are, that end up causing little snowflakes or little precipitation things to kind of float downwards. Kind of get used to the way they kind of come out. You'll need to use these against the final boss of the game, so it's good to get kind of used to popping those snow bubbles pretty early. The next boss is Missile Tractor, a giant monster truck at the bottom. But here is the thing, we don't have to worry about the monster truck. Just charge up and float up to the top. Here you can use the stars to hopefully easily take out the Zenchan enemies, and then just gather the items or wait for them to disappear, and the battle's over. You don't even have to defeat the boss to move on in this one. Onwards to level 51. It starts off with a bunch of invader enemies trying to invade our little space at the bottom. Sometimes you get lucky and a heart does appear, so you can gather that if you need, so you get that extra hit point. After dealing with all those invaders, you could go up and grab the star balloons if needed, but for the most part those invader guys come right towards you in your area, so you really don't have to do a whole lot of moving in that stage. For this stage, wait for the Needler guy to pop up the hat and then immediately bubble him if possible. After dealing with him, then focus on the monster enemies. Because of the way the level is structured, the monster guys will mostly stay on the outskirts. They won't come into that little center area, so it's a good spot to stand and wait for them to slowly come to you. Here we have a couple of monster enemies in some tight areas, as well as a Flareon enemy. You do get the lightning bolt bubbles if you want to pop them in order to kind of help you out, but for the most part you can kind of just get to the top, deal with the Flareon, and then wait for the monster enemies to come to you. The next level could be a little bit difficult, but thankfully they give you star bubbles, so you can easily pop them to take out most enemies. You can float up and do some charged up bubble blast to the Manticore to deal with him early if you need to, but those star bubbles appear pretty quickly and really right where you're standing, so it's very easy to hit them and complete this level. Round number 55, watch out for a couple of pull enemies in the main kind of top part here. You have the needler enemies that you can get the little flame bubbles to kind of go over their little chambers and take them out easily. Trying to get down there and actually do damage to them without using the flame bubbles is a bit of a challenge for sure. It's not too hard to get them kind of lined up, and you can do nice little leaps between the little towers, so you should be able to pop those balloons and not get hit by the needler. The next level is a little challenging. There's a lot of mana core enemies, but luckily a lot of times you will get one of those doors to show up, so you can grab that and go on to a bonus game instead, and this is a little easier, may take a little bit longer, but definitely easier than battling all 4 of those manticores. If you are stuck battling them though, try to get them to bunch together a bit, and then use charged up blast to get multiple bubbles out at the same time, and hopefully you can slowly take them out one by one, just kind of moving back and forth across the level. Focus on the manticores first before the other enemy. For the next level, you have a bunch of pull enemies in the center, but the water bubbles will easily and efficiently take out most of them, especially if you pop ones early on before they're able to really escape that center chamber. There is a Flareon enemy, but it's once again taken out easily by the same water bubbles that are going to take out the pull enemies. During the development of Bubble Bobble Part 2, the Game Boy game was being made at the same time, and while it's known as Bubble Bobble Part 2 in North America and Japan, it's known as Bubble Bobble Jr. It's a similar style of game as far as the gameplay is concerned, but both games ended up having greatly different stories. Watch out for the snagger enemy standing on the far left or right platforms will be a good spot to wait for him to kind of get to you and lunge, but you should have enough space to keep blasting bubbles at the snagger to get rid of him, and then you can just focus on the few other enemies. Level number 59 has a Robo-Zen enemy at the top, similar to that first boss we dealt with in the game, but this one fires missiles that kind of home in and chase you down. I recommend taking up either the right or left side first, using a float to take out the invader, then get to the top to battle the Robo-Zen. The 2 invaders, even if you bubble one and it doesn't pop, will end up at the bottom part of the screen, so focus on the Robo-Zen first just because those annoying missiles, and then take out the 2 invaders. The boss at level 60 is Rock, the hardest boss we've dealt with by far in the game, flying overhead and trying to get lightning bolts to crash in on us. Of course, avoid Rock bouncing all around the room the best you can, and what you need to keep doing is firing out these star balloons and popping them as much as possible. Just sending these rotating stars is enough to keep doing damage to Rock. Sometimes you'll miss, but a lot of times you'll be able to at least hit him with one hit as he floats around. The battle will continue, and he'll change into his second form, a little bit scarier, and firing out lightning bolts in all directions. It's a bit hard to dodge, but if he's away from you a little bit, you should be able to get in between some of the openings. It does take a fair amount of hits, so you will have to do quite a bit of dodging throughout this battle, and since most of the other bosses weren't nearly as challenging, it may be a bit jarring, this boss, as far as the difficulty, but once he's taken care of, we're moving on to the next set of levels. For the bonus game after level 60, here we have this target in the middle opening up its mouth. You can see the arrow kind of pointing the hand, saying like, hey, this is where you need to hit it. And basically you need to bounce the ball up into that opening when the mouth is open, which is a little difficult. It's a very small window, and a lot of times you'll just send the ball bouncing all around. A little bit funner, I think, than just the straight up volleyball, but not as easy as the maze, so really, it depends on your preference for which one of these bonus games you end up liking the most. For me, I go with the mazes just because I can complete them a lot quicker. The next set of 20 levels, the final set of 20 levels, take place in the Castle of Fire. We're going to start off by going to the top and battle the Robozen enemy, before then focusing on the few other enemies in the level. The next level has a lot of blobby enemies, but luckily we do get tornado bubbles that will make their way through. They can sometimes be a little bit hard to pop where we need them to in order to take out multiple blobby enemies. You mainly want the ones on the left side, which will help you out a little bit. If for some reason you can't get the bubbles to go your way, eventually those blobby guys will start to keep moving and hopefully come towards you where you can get them into those bubbles and finish them off. For this level, we're going to start off by jumping in the center portion here, take out the two invaders, and then focus on the ghost monsters. Similar to the Hutakuns that we've been dealing with earlier on, that we have to blast off their hats, here you have to blast off the sheets of the ghost, and then you're able to bubble them up. During the level, they may get a few in the center, so once they are there, you can then just go in at your leisure and finish them off. This one is all about invader enemies. You have a couple in the center area that we're going to have to deal with, as well as ones immediately at the top. I'm going to drop through the hole in the floor to take out the ones at the top first, and then focus on the center area. Floating up in the middle here can be a little bit difficult, but then you can kind of just jump up and take out the two invaders. Here we have an annoying little Twizzer enemy in the center that can be difficult to get to, but you can just use the electricity bubbles in order to blast him. And it actually only takes like 2 to defeat him, and then you can take out the Zenchan enemy that's floating around on the right side of the screen. Here we have another one of those very annoying helicopters. Thankfully, though, it's on a portion where we can actually stand and deliver. We're still going to use fired, charged up shots if possible to do the most amount of damage to the chopper. I honestly don't care, though, if I take a little bit of damage, as my focus is to get rid of it as quick as possible, just so that he doesn't end up launching more and more enemies the farther the level goes on. For this level, you have a few invaders as well as ghost monsters. I'm going to go up here, though, and grab this umbrella. This will allow me to skip a couple of levels here. Trust me, you're not going to miss very much here, as we then make our way to the next major boss encounter. Here we battle the blue ghost skull brother. It's a very easy fight, though. You just grab the potion and then start popping the bubbles. It's these snow ones that kind of go in a weird kind of arcing pattern, but they hit a pretty decent hitbox around them as they float up. It won't take too many, though, to actually defeat this guy, and we're moving on to the final set of levels. While we have been reunited with Judy, we haven't been able to turn ourselves back into our human form, so we have to keep going to take out the rest of the evil Skull Brothers to hopefully be transformed back. Here we have the SOS letters, similar to the way we had them in Bubble Bobble 1 in that level, so here we have to battle a bunch of enemies in a very small area. It can be difficult to not take some damage during this one. Just keep on firing and keep getting those guys in bubbles as quick as you can. Here we have some pull enemies bouncing, springing on the top portion. Just have to make our way through the little openings and then start to battle them. If you do get them into bubbles, you have to wait for them to slowly come back up and get them to pop before they end up getting a little bit angry with you and may potentially get into the maze-like structure below, but they should pop themselves back out to the top so you can finish them off in case you missed one. For this level, you have a bunch of the Haitakun enemies in the center. We're going to get up immediately and start blasting out bubbles. Should be able to take out most of them right away. I'm going to end up taking a hit of damage, but I can just keep firing out in order to battle the giant Robo-Zen. Since one of the Haitakun enemies did escape from me, I'm going to use the flame bubbles in this level to help me at least deal with that last one. For the next level, we have a couple invaders and another one of those giant Robo-Zens. I'm going to fire a few bubbles and then go to the top. Wait for the invader to come down as well as the Robo-Zen. Finish off the Robo-Zen and then pop that one invader before focusing on the one in the center. You can do a nice little float up or bouncing off the bubbles, whichever way you need to in order to get him inside that bubble and then finish him off to move on to that next level. Level 75 has a couple of Haitakun enemies and a little tight space, so they're a bit difficult to deal with. So I'm going to go ahead and deal with the ghost monster enemies first, and then focus on those two enemies inside the very small area. To get to them, we're going to jump in the center portion and then time our bubble blast accordingly. These little short jumps up, you can kind of get them to sneak in there in order to get them inside of the bubbles. They may come out of that, of course, and you'll have to chase them down a bit, but thankfully not too difficult to hit them. Just have to time those shots correctly. Even though we haven't seen them much other than the opening, the drunk enemies are in this game. They're actually a bit tougher and bigger than they are in the original Bubble Bobble here, as well as we will have the super drunk as well to battle from the original game. Takes several bubbles to actually bubble up one of the drunks in this one, so they're kind of bigger enemies. I actually prefer that. Gives them a bit more presence, I think. For the next level, we're going to take out a bunch of the pull enemies on the bottom. You can grab the gate if you want to do another minigame, but I'm just going to avoid that. To get up here, it's a little bit difficult. You have to really fight the game. You want to float up to the center part here, and then once you get up here and get to the top of the gear, if you go to the left wall, then it'll take you up the rest of the way through the stream to the top platform. It took me a fair amount of time to master actually getting up here. So you have to float to the top of the one thing and kind of push yourself just to the top of it and then hug the left wall. If you do it too early, you're just going to ride the stream back downwards instead of up. Another very annoying object to watch out for are the exploding bubbles that appear in the later couple of levels. If you pop them, they blow up, of course, and end up hurting you, and since all the bubbles like to gather into one spot, if you're taking out any of the normal enemies and bubble them up, the bubble may potentially go into one of those exploding ones, and the only way to pop it is going to be also taking some damage yourself, so try to avoid them as much as you can. We're now down to the final two levels of the game. They're both intense boss encounters. We start off this one with the three Skull Brothers showing up before disappearing and the Super Drunk making an appearance. We're going to have to use the electricity bubbles in order to blast at the Super Drunk, similar to what we did in the original Bubble Bobble. It's not nearly as difficult as that one, still fires out a pretty good amount of projectiles, and there's patterns. You can't destroy the projectiles with the lightning bolts like you could in the original. But it doesn't take too many to pop him, and you move on to the next level, the next boss encounter. For this one, we have to use the snow bubbles. So we're going to start off by immediately going over and popping a few. The two Skull Brothers that we have to deal with first, the blue and the green ones, go to the top a lot, so we have to kind of force our way up. The target that the blue one fires out makes you shrink for a period of time, which can be a little bit annoying. It doesn't take too many of these bubbles popping in order to defeat these guys. So just kind of go to the top and you can kind of get them to rain down on top of them. Once the two are defeated, the final boss makes its actual appearance. If it's on the center platform like this, you can just keep going underneath of it back and forth and launching up those projectiles at it. If he is on the bottom one, you will have to fire him out a little bit, but if you still pop them relatively close, the arc that they end up having should be able to collide with them. Once he's defeated, you can sit back and enjoy the ending, the Bubble Bobble Part 2. So there you have it, Bubble Bobble Part 2, not to be confused with Rainbow Islands, known as Bubble Bobble 2. Kind of a weird whole release thing for all of the Bubble Bobble franchise in general. The game may not be as finely remembered as the original, mostly because it came out so late in the NES life, and a lot of people never got the opportunity to play it. Also, not including co-op, I think, was a big mistake, and one of the reasons why it's hard for me to really love this one as much as I love the original, but it's still a very, very fun game that I've had a lot of enjoyment mastering over the last few months. That, guys, is going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through, though. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.